Yeah. And you don't know what the impact is going to be. Right. You what you've done on that YouTube channel is a good example. You don't know who's watched that, how their lives have now changed because they've seen that and they've experienced that, and now they're doing something differently that is now touching other people's lives. Like creates this ripple effect that you simply don't know. I like to say that about books, right? But books can go places you'll never go and touch more people than you'll ever know. And it really is how it works. I mean, you can just you when you move, you can't predict what the impact's going to be. But I can guarantee what the impact's going to be if you don't move.
Well, welcome everybody back to the Sean Trey Show. I've got a really awesome guest with me today. Now, would you like to tell people who you are and a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, Sean. Well, first of all, great to be with you. Bill Blankschaen, New York Times bestselling writer, all those kind of credentials and all that fun stuff. I've written hundreds of books and all that fun stuff. But if it's all right, I can tell a little bit of my origin story, if that's helpful
I'd
to your
love it,
audience.
man.
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
it was like 14 years ago or so. I was doing something very different. I had helped start was running a private school. And I got hugs from kindergartners every day and help teenagers
That's awesome.
find their way in life and work with families and all that. But I felt like I had a deeper calling within me. Like I was wired to be a writer, and I always thought of myself as a writer, but I wasn't actually writing. I thought of
Mm,
myself as a storyteller, but I wasn't actually telling stories, right? But I was doing good work, but not really what I felt like I was made to do, if that makes sense. And so finally, I reached the point where, hey, I don't want to look back someday and regret this. That I either have to let go of that calling within me and put all my efforts into the school, or let go of the school, put my efforts into my calling. And I chose the calling because I figured somebody else can run the school better than I can, but nobody else can do what I feel called to do. And so we stepped out from the school. We had 6 kids. Went a year with no income, but I never worked harder in my life.
yeah.
Studying book creation and writing book proposals and talking to every publisher and everybody I could speak of to the industry, and uh, just studying the art and science of storytelling and what that means and what that looks like. And yeah, I think you'll relate to this, Sean. I remember one day in the spring. It was in Ohio. It was a beautiful spring day, and I was sitting out in the backyard in the trees, surrounded by the trees, trying to write. Pen,
Mm,
pad, the old-fashioned way, and the sun was shining. We could hear the birds chirping. The wind was kind of drifting through the trees, just beautiful on the outside. But on the inside, I was like, are we going to make it? Are we going to be able to pay the mortgage next month? Are we going to end up living under a cardboard box under a bridge somewhere? What does that look like? And at the end of the day, though, I chose to keep doing what I felt called to do, to keep writing. And as it turned out, I got my first book deal with a publisher. And in fact, it was the very book I was working on that day when I had those thoughts that I so clearly recall. And when I did it, I realized I'm actually really good at this. And other people started saying, "Hey, can you help me with mine? Can you help?" And it got momentum and just kept going. Out of that came StoryBuilders, our company, where that's what we do. We help people tell stories that make the world a better place. So we work with big names like John Maxwell and Lewis Howes, Dean Graziosi, all kinds of other leaders in all kinds of places, and all sorts of people that you haven't heard of yet, but who are building their message and sharing that with the world. And because I just believe strongly, Sean, from that experience, that your breakthrough begins when you start with your story, when you're willing to authentically lean into, all right, this is who I am, and I need to share it with the world. That's the game changer I have found.
a couple of years ago, I was a teacher and I had worked in media, but my teaching was my side hustle that had become kind of a stable thing.
Yeah.
And I was sitting there one day realizing that I love teaching, but my calling is in teaching a wider audience. It's speaking to a larger group of people, and that I had to find a way that I could channel that same joy for sharing information, for sharing knowledge to a larger audience.
Yeah.
And I sat there and said, you know what? And my friend was like, hey, I created my own podcast. And I was like, that's awesome. How did you do it? Tell me about it so I
Mm.
can do the same thing. And he's like, it's hard, sticking with it's hard. And I was like, that's not a problem for me because I know it was like, it was this one Shia LaBeouf clip. Or, no, it wasn't
Yeah.
Shia. Maybe it was, who was it? It was Jake Gyllenhaal. I don't even know what the movie
Huh.
was, but he was in this movie and they're like talking about giving up. And he's like, I've got a hook in me.
Mm,
And it just pulls me forward when other people can't see it. But when they ask why, there is no why. This is what
yeah.
I must do. This is what I am called to do. This is my life.
Yeah.
And I think that, in our lives, we have those whispers, those moments that the calling comes. You can look at it. I loved studying. I studied writing as well, and I love the hero's journey. And I love, the beginning of the hero's journey. The hero is called. There is that call, but so many do not heed the call. They stay stuck. They stay in the known. But yet, I remember it for me. I was in California, and I had a job at a company that I won't mention here, but it was not a company I would ever want to work for, and morally completely contrasted with my belief
Mm,
system and who I am.
yeah.
And that was the only job that I was getting interviewed for. And I sat there and I said, this is not where I want to be. And it was this moment that clicked. And I had lived in Vietnam before, and I said, well, if this job doesn't turn out, then I think I'm just going to move back to Southeast Asia and see what I can make of it, because this is not where I want to be and what I want to be doing. And 24 hours later, I got the call. You haven't gotten the job. And I picked up my phone and I called my friend who worked at a school here in Vietnam. And I said, hey, do you still have that position open that you offered me before? And he's like, yeah, man, you want it? You can come on over. And it was about a month later, I was on a plane, packed up, took everything, took my dog, and the doors then opened for me. The doors then opened for me like nothing
Right.
that you
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah.
The doors opened, and it was exactly where I was supposed to be and what I was supposed to be doing. But I had to heed
Yeah.
the call, and I had to understand that there was a path for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I don't know if your experience is this, Sean, but when I stepped out from the school, I didn't have a vision for we're going to build story builders and it's going to look like that,
No,
right? I didn't
no.
know all the details of what it would do. And I think a lot of times you have to step out before you know how it will turn out. And
Yeah,
but when you step out, you when you get into motion, it's almost like, imagine if you're walking down a path in the woods. If you stand in one spot, there are parts of the woods you just can't see because there's trees in the way. But as you
yeah,
start walking, your perspective shifts and you start seeing things you couldn't see before and realizing, oh, there's actually another trail up there. I didn't know there was that trail there and I could go this way or that way, right? There's all kinds of opportunities come to the person who's in motion. That was actually something that there's a great quote by, I'm gonna totally cheat here and just open my book and look at it because it's in there. It's
please do.
by William H. Murray. I'm sure you've heard it before, but it's this idea that until one is committed, there's hesitancy, the chance to draw back. And he talks about how once you make the commitment and start moving, then he says all sorts of things occur to help you that would never otherwise have occurred. Right? You kind of put things in motion that you do that, we struggle to have the courage to step into that, right? Because there's a lot of there's like several traps that I talk about in the book of what holds us back from that. But I think that's the big struggle. We some often sense what it should be, but we kind of hold back because we're afraid of what that unknown could look like.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And it's like the unknown is scary, but on the other side of the unknown is a better, or at least a more fulfilled path if we are willing to walk down it. And but I 100% agree. The When I looked, um I did not have a grand ambition when I looked to move back to Southeast Asia. It was just the option that seemed the most right. And yet, once I did, the doors opened. I just had this friend invited me to the music studio. I came to the music studio that day and I saw this amazing singer and she was singing, and one thing led to another, and that was my wife.
Yep.
And, and it's like all of these different doors open that wouldn't have opened if I hadn't have been able to take that one step out the door. And it's powerful because it can be a single choice that you make. But if you do it with conviction, and then you do it with a willingness to see where that path might go, that can be the whole
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. Well, and that's all part of when I talk about story, that's all part of it. I don't just mean what has happened to somebody, but what have you learned along the way? What experiences have you had that have given you expertise that you can then share with the world and share with others if you're intentional
Yeah.
about it? Right. So whether you're an entrepreneur or a thought leader or just a mom and a dad, and you say, hey, I want to build a side hustle, or I just want to have more impact in the world. How am I telling my story well? We work with people at all levels of that, but the principles are the same of just getting intentional about that. Figuring out what is at the core of who I am, and what is it that I might want to do with it, because there's a lot you can do with it. There's a lot you can be intentional about it, but you first have to get to that place where you're really true to who you are, and true to um, the impact and the influence that you want to make, and figuring out that story. I mean, I think a lot of people just don't value their own story. They don't value it
Yeah.
because, for a lot of reasons. One is it feels normal. I call it the normalcy trap, right?
Yeah.
What has happened to me in my experience? Well, I mean, that's my all I've known, so that's not unusual. No one else would want to have any value from that. But even your story, like relocating to Vietnam, I mean, you would have a lot of expertise, right? For people who are, hey, I'm thinking about relocating to Vietnam. Who should I talk to? Who can help? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that kind of expertise they would find invaluable in that moment.
Right.
But I think that's kind of one of the light bulb moments for people, is realizing that their story isn't for everyone,
Uh,
right? Whatever their expertise is, they're not trying to help everybody in the world. There are certain people that they are perfectly positioned to help by sharing their knowledge, their expertise, their successes, their failures. I literally just had this happen the other day, Sean. Had a younger couple that also had 6 kids reach out and say, "Hey, can you guys have walked this road? Would you guys mind mentoring us as we craft, lead our kids and figure this out and so forth?" And I realized, oh, okay, I guess I have learned a thing or two along the way that I could
right.
share and be helpful to them. But because it feels normal to me, it just feels like real life. It just feels that there's no value there. But in fact, there is. There's tremendous value that all of us have if we're conscious of it and aware enough and have a heart to share it with others.
I love that. And there was a couple things I want to unpack there.
Yeah.
First off is I remember one of the things, living in a different country, you see things that are
Mm.
very different. And it's stuff that I love photography, and I'll take photos here in Vietnam of things that I think seemingly are mundane, but when I post them, my friends are fascinated by what I shared. There was one day that we have a drainage pipe that runs under the front of our house. It's kind of the sewer line for the street. And it goes under the front of the house, and under all of the front of the houses. But there's one of the access points is in all the kind of like the parking area, atrium, the front area of the house. It's not the main house proper, but it's just this front area. And so one day these guys came in to clean it out because we had had some neighbors do construction, and they had put some refuse and concrete dust and gunk down there, and it needed to be cleaned. So I was like, well, how are they going to do it? People with shovels. Is it going to be some type of machine? I was thinking in the West, we're going to have a machine that goes down there and roots it out, some type of, rooter machine. And then I saw this guy putting in this jumpsuit, kind of stripping off his stuff. And they were like, everyone was just staring at this guy as he took off all of these extra things. And he was wearing this just orange jumpsuit. And he walked up. He walked closer, and then suddenly I noticed he was wearing some gloves, but they weren't like rubber gloves. They were just like, don't get cut fabric gloves. And he suddenly walked up to the thing and started to lower himself down into the sewage. and like he was up to here in pretty much straight up raw sewage, and he was pulling buckets of by bucket out of there. And these guys were sitting around watching, and they were watching me watching, and they were like, "Is this how you guys do it back home?" And I was like, Absolutely in no way, man. Like OSHA would lose their mind. Yeah, there's no way that would be possibly happening. And like, but watching him do it, I was like, that's not how we do it. And I just watched that. But to these guys that were standing around, this was the most mundane job in the city. He's like, yeah, he's just the guy who cleans the sewer. But like for me and my friends, and I posted a video of it, and so many people were like, oh my goodness, that's wild.
Yeah.
It was like dirty jobs, but more
Yeah.
extreme.
Yeah.
And,
Exactly.
and it was like, the thing is that guy thought that this situation was completely normal. And there was like, why would I want to tell it? He's not going to be like, I'm going to go tell someone about my story. He's going to be like, this is just dumb. But leads to my question for someone who says, I don't have a story worth sharing, what would you tell them?
Yeah. Well, I would say every story matters,
Mm,
especially yours, right? And I think we need to look in the mirror and tell ourselves that, because there's so much in the world that tells us we don't. We tend to deify others and diminish ourselves, and because of that, we have to factor in that bias that almost always putting ourselves lower than we should be.
yeah.
And so, in my book, actually, I walk through a whole process for people to use to figure out what is I call it your meaningful message. What is it that unique thing that's burning inside of you, and how can I express it? Because when you get clear on that, that really becomes the core of what I call your story ecosystem, like this living, breathing ecosystem that you can build around it. Because you get clear on your message. I call it your message maker, and then you can talk about, do I want to multiply my message through a book or some other platform
Mm,
like that can really capture it and share it with the world and multiply the impact? And then from there, how do I want to monetize that message? I mean, think of that guy in the sewer.
right.
Somebody. Well, you mentioned dirty jobs, like Mike Rowe. Like he's made
Right.
a career out of highlighting people going in sewers like that, right?
Right.
But it takes, all right, that's unique. And there's a certain audience. I think that's important to understand too. Like, not everybody likes dirty jobs, right? Not everybody, it's not for everybody. But there are
Yeah.
people who do resonate. They want to see that, right? So then building that and then monetizing it beyond that. I just think there's so much capacity there. I mean, the creator world, the creator ecosystem that we're in now, this knowledge economy, if you want to call it that. I mean, that's headed toward what was it, $1 trillion in 2028, a trillion-dollar
Wow.
industry that people are sharing their knowledge and expertise through the incredible technology that we have today. And often that does take the form of a book, but then goes beyond that book, right? So there's just so much there that I feel like people sit on it untapped and don't do
Yeah.
anything with it. And then, decades later, they look up and realize, oh, it's too late. I missed my window to really share what I knew and all that. But it's almost never too late. I was talking to a 74-year-old gentleman yesterday. He's just got a wealth of entrepreneurial knowledge. He's built a business, and we're wanting to turn that into a book that he can share with younger people who are coming up and pass on his like legacy of wisdom in that way. So, yeah. Now, what I'm not saying everybody should write a book, right? Everybody's
Mm,
calling is different. Everybody's calling is unique, but everybody has a story.
I
Everybody
love that.
has wisdom that they've built up over the years that they can intentionally share with others if they tell it well. And that's kind of the key too, right? You got to get clear on it in order to tell it well. And anyways, I walk through all that in the book, Your Story Advantage, as well.
That's beautiful. One of the things too is like, I think that there is like a lot of introspection, and like, I think some people are not aware of that. Like, in a horrible way, uh, I remember the early seasons of American Idol. There were some people that went on there that tried to sing and did not realize they could not. And everyone would laugh, but one of the things that struck me is like, there was one guy that was on there, and he genuinely did not know that he was not the greatest at singing. He loved singing. I mean, and that's beautiful in and of itself, and he became kind of a star from being so bad. And And yet, what was interesting to me, and something that we've been talking to my daughter about, is finding out what it is that you are good at, what it is that is your thing. Because you can be trying something like crazy. You can be putting all of your energy into uh, underwater basket weaving, or, rollerblading. And maybe you're not the greatest at rollerblading. Maybe that's not your thing. And you have to figure out what it is that your real story is. And it's not just what you do. It's part of who you are. It's part of this core thing. And I think that it's the hard part is figuring that out. Because we often, and even the way I start this podcast, who are you and what do you do? Well, is what you do who you are? It's not always the same thing.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And because as I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about my own son, actually, who's 19 right now. And we were just having recent conversations about his life direction and career path and all that. He's finished up his last year in college and so forth. Um, and I was hearkening back to, it was years ago, before I made the move away from the school, I actually developed what I call my strength statement. Like, and here it is. It's I'm at my best when I am creatively questioning, connecting, and communicating in the context of my beliefs. And there's a lot of work that went behind that, of diving down into, where in life do I come alive? Where does it, like, man, time flies. I could do this all day. I love it. I'm good at it. All
Yeah,
these kind
yeah.
of things. And it's the idea of creativity and then connecting, questioning, and communicating. I first realized I had that strength when I took Marcus Buckingham's Find Your Strengths, I think it was. This was back in early 2000s, a strengths finder. And I took it, and it said I had something called input as one of my strength themes. And input just means I can absorb vast amounts of information quickly and hold it kind of suspended in midair, in mental midair, and then make connections with it. And I'm really good at it. And for I think my entire life, I assumed, well, everybody else can do that too. That they must just not want to do that, or whatever the reason, right? And then I realized, no, actually, I'm wired that way, in a very specific way, that very few people can do that. Now, don't ask me to fix your car. Don't ask me to do anything mechanical. That is not not me. Other people can do other things. We all have our gifts and strengths around these things. But when I had that strength statement, that's ultimately is what led me to that point of making the decision. All right, if that's who I am, then I need to go in this direction to make the best use of those strengths. And that's ultimately what led me to do that. So as I was coaching my son, I was, talking to him about his strengths and so forth, and then kind of developing a little path of, all right, well, what I said, identify like the five industry directions, the five big directions that you might be interested in. Let's do that first. And once you get that done, let's talk about, all right, of those five, let's narrow it down and then go deeper. What are the possibilities within that industry, right? So just being intentional about it. I think so often we just let life accidentally happen,
Yeah.
and then we complain about it. Right?
Right.
But it's almost like if we let it happen accidentally, we're not responsible for what happens, right? So there's a sense of relief that we feel. But if we're intentional about telling our stories and how we share our stories with the world, that becomes that force multiplier of our impact and our influence and our income ultimately.
I love that. There was I don't know where she went, but I love the whole Marie Kondo thing. She was around, she was talking about the simplicity, and does it bring you joy? And one of the things I found at the dollar store, I found her book, except it was like Marie Kondo on work. And it was like, and one of the things that I absolutely loved was they were talking about, um, does this bring you joy? And I think that that is such an underrated question. Like, at the end of the day, one of my favorite things in the world, I have two things that I love more than anything else. First of all, is teaching, but not in the classroom, like teaching people, telling people stories, and guiding them, and in person, seeing, like, that is just such a thing that I feed off of that energy. I love that vibe. I love standing in front of an auditorium of people and telling people stories and getting them to react and leaving them feeling inspired. Love that. I also love every day being able to uh, show people a way forward out of seemingly challenging situations. So if, I love being able to show up and say, hey, we've got a problem. Well, let's break it down into steps that you can take to get out of that problem. And so it's kind of like a mentorship. And I was sitting there evaluating, well, these are the things I love. And what's the easiest and best way for me to do it? And I was like, well, if I want to be standing in front of an auditorium of 1,000 people, right, giving a lecture, what are the things that I can do from here to get to there? You know what I mean? And that was one of the things that brought me to a podcast. I was like, well, talking on YouTube, giving talks, writing books. These are all the things that I put in front of me. That was like, if I want to get from here to there, these are the things that I can do. Because first and foremost, I recognized what I was good at, but I also recognized what brought me joy. And I think when you can start looking at those things that bring you that joy, it doesn't have to be joy. It can be fulfillment. It can be a sense of ease. But if there's something that makes you feel, does it bring you joy, Marie Kondo style, it might be something to keep in your life.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and this is what I love when I work with my kids, because I've taught them these things. We've talked about it so many times. They're like, well, I don't want to go just get a job. I want to do something that I actually love to do. And I think a lot of young people are in that position these days. They're in that. I want meaningful work. I don't want, maybe my dad's generation, it was more, find a safe, secure job with benefits. That's your number one, my number one aim. But now I think this generation is much more, I want to do something meaningful. I want to live a fulfilled life. I want to do that. And so I think it does come down to they're asking those questions of what do I actually love to do?
Yeah,
What to your point, what does give me joy? I think it's a great question. And not all of life is going to give you the warm fuzzies and joyful stuff all the time. But is the general direction fulfilling? Is it bringing that what you're doing? And if not, life's too short maybe to keep doing that. To
I
reconsider
agree.
that, find a different way. And that's what I mean. Like when I talk about that breakthrough begins when you start with your story. Like you gotta come to terms with who you are, right? Because who you are gets multiplied by how well you tell your story. But if you don't know who you are in the first place, then essentially that's like zero times whatever is still going to be zero, right? So you got to get clear on who you are and get to know you. That's your hardwiring, your personality, your skills, your talents, your strength, all that kind of stuff. And you got to be okay with you before you can then turn to the world and say, all right, I have something that I want to share. Even if it's scary, just share it. Even if you think people might not like it, or worse, I might fail and they might laugh at me. Like I might walk on a stage of 1,000 people and trip and do a face plant and everybody will laugh. It'll be all over YouTube.
Right.
That's a risk you take, right?
Right.
And you can take steps to make sure you don't trip, right? But and prepare for that. That's the key. I think being willing to have the courage to tell your story well and share it with the world, that becomes the multiplier effect.
My daughter is getting better at piano. She's been practicing for a couple of years, and for a couple of years it was rough.
Hmm.
It was like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star repetitively for ages, and it was just like I was wondering if it was the right thing to do. But finally, she started falling in love with the instrument and started really getting much better. But she still has some weaknesses. One of her things
Mm.
is sight reading, and she's got a contest in 2 weeks. And as we're looking at the 2 weeks out date, she says, "Wow, I don't know this song very well." And her teacher and I were like, "Not a problem. You've got 2 weeks. You've got the time." And there could be that she walks up on stage and falls down flat on her face, type of a thing. That is the fear that sits inside everyone's space. But at the same time, the question should be there as well. What if I fly? All of us go for this fear of like, what if I fail? What if I fail? What if I fail? Well, what if you succeed? My
Yes.
wife has a song that we just had written for her by this amazing songwriter in the US named Roberta Lee. And the song was, What If? What if it all works out? What if it all works out? What if, you take that chance and it seems like everything is going to go crashing down on the rocks. But what if you take that leap and then you realize that you learn to fly, you know? But you gotta take the leap. You gotta be willing to try. And that is terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's why I say it comes down to faith, and this is something I talk about in the book too, this idea of, and when I say faith, I don't necessarily mean religious faith per se. It can be, but I mean just having. I define faith as doing what you believe to be true, often in spite of what you see, sense, or feel. Not always, but often. Right. So, what do you believe to be true about life, about you, and then acting on that, right? Because until you act on it, you don't really know what you believe. It's just words until you put action behind it, right? You might have thought, oh, I believe I could enjoy Vietnam, but until you actually got in the plane and went over there, it was just talk, right? So, like for your daughter or anybody in that situation, like I love that idea that you just shared of, I believe I can fly, right? That I think it was a Michael Jackson song way back in the day, right? But that idea of if you believe that, then you need to act like it. Yeah. And you need to do the things necessary to make that happen, as opposed to, I believe I'm going to fall flat on my face. Well, then you're probably going to do the things that are going to make that happen too, and self sabotage and all that. But if you embrace that idea of, hey, I need to live this out by faith in what I believe to be true. There's just so much about that so much of life, I think, is made up of stepping out before you know how it turns out. It's that idea of, I believe this, and so I'm going to step out and trust that it's going to put me in a better place if I do that.
I love that. Stepping out before you know it's gonna work out. I I've had so many times in my life where I was getting ready to I remember one of the probably the dumbest things I've ever done was I moved up to Los Angeles, wanted to be an actor for a period of time.
Sure.
That didn't last, but it was fun. It's fun while I was there. But I remember that I got this call for a movie, Angels and Demons, and I'm on the 405 freeway north. It was before the days where you weren't able to use a phone while driving. Got the phone call, and I took the phone call, and they were like, "Do you want to come work on this movie?" And I was like, "How many days is it?" It's like, "It's gonna be 5 days." I was like, "I don't think I can get 5 days off from work." Pretty
Right.
sure that I would get let go from my job if I tried to ask for 5 days off. And I was like, "You know what? I don't think so." And they're like, "Okay, this is a good movie. It's with a big director. It's Ron Howard, Angels and Demons. It's a big movie." And I was just like, "Yeah, I can't do it." And I was just driving, and I was like, "Man, I just made the wrong decision." And then suddenly, I I got another call about an hour later. I was still on the road, middle of traffic, and they're like, "All right, this is a different role. We still really like you. Can you come in for this?" And I was like, "Guys, I just told you I can't take 5 days off." They're like, "No, this is 15 days." And I was like, 15 days. And I said, "Yeah, I'll do it.
Oh,
I'll do it." And I went in and I went to my boss and I said, "You know what? I'm quitting my job. I hope that I'll be able to find something when I'm done with this because they wouldn't give me the time off I asked." And then I left. I went away, and day one started. I was on the movie, and I was so excited, just like all the other actors. And we were running around set, and everyone was excited telling their stories. And actually, it was a bunch of guys that were like, now looking back, it was just people with day jobs that were there trying to do this and have some fun. But we were all hopeful, and we were like, it was this big scene that was supposed to be in Rome. They were filming in LA, and I was dressed like an Italian riot cop. And they had me dressed like an Italian riot cop for about 10 days straight. We were there 10 days. And then finally on the 12th day, I hadn't even been on set. I was just in holding for 12 days. And I was just like, man, this didn't turn into anything. But then on the last nights, I just started talking to people and went around and just networked. But it wasn't networking. It was just, man, I'm probably going home tomorrow. So let's just go meet people and talk and hear their stories. And eventually I just talked to everyone. I started giving people advice, chatting about different things. And I got to meet a bunch of people. And I got a couple of the crew people, and I gave them some advice and chatted with them. And like, Deshaun, that's really cool, man. Thank you for that. And then finally, the last day of shooting showed up, and I was walking around, and I was like, you know what? I took the chance, and tomorrow I'm back to looking for a job, and might as well just have some fun and be thankful. I took this in faith, and be thankful for where I'm at, and just let go of the rest. And I was standing there, and they made us change. Like, hey, do you want to go out to set? Come on, you got to be in the movie a little bit before you go home. I ran out on the set, and I was wearing these regular clothes, and suddenly my friend came up to me, Jackson. He's like, "Hey, Sean, how tall are you?" And they're like, "You're gonna come up here, and you're gonna do this other role. You're gonna stand here. You're gonna be a stand-in." And I was like, "Oh, cool." And they brought me back for 5 months to do this other job. So a week turned into 5 months, and that 5 months became the foundation for me learning about filmmaking. And that filmmaking foundation is what I carried with me, and I have my own media business. It all began from that single choice to take those 11 days off from work and quit my job. It all started with that. But the call came the first time, and I turned it down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow. Yeah, just being willing to step out and pursue that, right? To do that. I have a similar story actually. The whole backstory of the whole push to even leave the school started because I'd been teaching at the school from a book that I had read. A guy who was a well known radio host at the time and still is, and was teaching from the book. And long story short, he was going to be coming to our school. We were able to get him to help us with some ads and stuff, and he was coming to our school. And I had this idea. I was walking down the driveway, and I'm like, I wonder if I should pitch the idea. I could take what I've been teaching for years around his book, turn it into a curriculum, repackage it with the book. We could republish the book with a study guide attached. We could do all this kind of stuff. And my first thought was, no, 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 don't take any risks. Don't do that. Just stay, status quo. Um, but I remember that point of decision. I remember, I am going to ask him. And so I was very intentional about it and approaching it. I actually found he had given a commencement speech at a university not long before. And he said, hey, if you ever meet people of influence, don't hesitate to ask for what you want. So I used that when I met with him. I said, hey, you said when you meet someone of influence, don't. And so I'm going to ask. and it was amazing. He pulled out his iPad, pulled out his pen, and he's like, ask away. What do you need? I'm like, well, there we go. So I asked, first of all, I asked some things for the school, and he was more than happy to help. And then I turned my direction to this other project, and he was like, oh, I love it. Let me connect you with my publisher. Let's move forward. Let's make it happen. And as I look back and reflect, though, like 75% at least of what StoryBuilders has done, I can trace back through relationships to that moment and that relationship, because that relationship opened up this relationship, that relationship. So much came from that. Like you can kind of follow it back to, because I had the courage to step out by faith and do what I believe to be true, and do that. It wasn't that book became some massive bestseller or anything like that. Hopefully it was impactful, but it changed things, just like your story. Like that 15-day role wasn't the game changer you thought it was, and so forth. But then it kind of was. It opened doors for other things that you hadn't understood before, and now it's led to your whole success, your media company, right? So, yeah, I think it's having the courage to live, to first be intentional about our story, realize the advantage we have in our story, and then have the courage to leverage it intentionally to do something that makes the world a better place.
I love that. I love that a lot, actually. Because, what are you doing? The world is changing, and it has tons of issues. And one of the things that I realized is that for me, when we were home during the pandemic, and I was looking for kids content because I had to homeschool my daughter that year. There were no schools that were open for a year in Vietnam, right when my daughter was going into first grade. And I sat there and asked myself, I said, okay, there's no content out there that I like for my daughter. So I have two choices. One, I can sit here and complain about it. Or two, I can be part of the solution. I can be
Right.
part of the people that's out there making good kids content. And we started my daughter's YouTube channel, Ilani's Little World, that now has over 11,000 followers. And I still growing. We're still hammering away at it. And one of the things that I realized was, you can sit there and complain, or you can be part of the solution. You can be part of making this world a better place. And I don't know about you, about anyone listening, but I sure would love this world to be a more kind, caring, loving place. And if your story can be part of that, then do it. Tell it. Because, don't sit there and complain. We all get stuck in complaining. But at the end of the day, wouldn't it be better to try to be part of the solution, to be part of the answer to what's going wrong with this world, and to make it a better place, a more loving place? That at least is what I think.
Yeah, and you don't know what the impact is going to be, right?
Yeah.
You what you've done on that YouTube channel is a good example. You don't know who's watched that, how their lives have now changed because they've seen that and they've experienced that, and now they're doing something differently that is now touching other people's lives. Like, creates this ripple effect that you simply don't know. I like to say that about books, right? But books can go places you'll never go and touch more people than you'll ever know. And it really is how it works. I mean, you can just you when you move, you can't predict what the impact's going to be, but I can guarantee what the impact's going to be if you don't move. That's a pretty solid one. So,
If you could go back and give your younger self some advice, what advice would you give yourself?
yeah, first thing I would do, I would tell them, focus on your mindset, focus on your thought patterns, focus on getting that positive mindset, growth mindset, really getting intentional about that. Second, heal, right? Invest in healing. Identify the places where you have the pains and things that have happened in life, and don't just try to bury them. Don't suppress them. Deal with them, heal them, and go through that process. And then the third is, um, early on in life, I had 12 years in retail when I was a teenager, and then young adult, and so I was involved in retail and retail management before I got into education. And even then, I kept moving progressively closer to what I really love to do, what I was really good at, and having that breakthrough. But I would encourage myself, sure, get experiences, try some things, etc., but consistently have the mindset of, I'm moving toward figuring out more and more who I am, what my story is, how it can be a help. Because I think, like anybody, there were times that I set myself on autopilot, if you will. Like, all right, I'm in a good place, I'm going to coast for a while. And the problem with coasting is it only goes one direction, downhill. So, nobody ever coasted their way to success. And so that's the third thing I would say is don't coast. Keep moving forward, keep moving up, keep raising the bar, keep growing, keep learning, and just making that, again, going back to mindset. Part of your mindset in life is that I have a story, I want to make a contribution, I want it to matter, and so I'm going to keep looking for ways to step out by faith and make more of an impact.
I love that. I think we really do need to find ways to make more of an impact. And on that note, um, I would love for you to share with people, how can they reach out and find you if they want to tell more of their story? Where can people look for you and find out more about you and what you do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, they can grab a copy of my new book, Your Story Advantage, which shares a lot of these things in much greater depth. They can go to yourstoryadvantage.com. We got some cool bonuses, or they can get it wherever good books are sold. But if they want to have a conversation, just go to mystorybuilders.com/story, mystorybuilders.com/story, and just schedule time to talk with us. We'd love to have that conversation. We love meeting new people, hearing their stories, and seeing if we can add value to them. If we can, great. If not, we'll get out of your way and let you go on with what you're doing. But that's the easiest way to get in touch with us. And of course, we're all over social media and Facebook and LinkedIn and all that fun stuff too. But Always love having a conversation.